Hello fellow Kerbonauts, welcome to KSP Fully Loaded Episode 6. And we are starting off with a contract that we kinda forgot to do last time, which is sending this surface scanner up into an orbit around the Earth and scanning 75% of the surface. And for this we need to adapt our previous rocket, and this basically means we take out a lot of fuel and actually also reducing the size of our solid rocket boosters and the upper stage as well. So we need a lot less fuel because not only is our satellite lighter, we also need to go less far, and this is of course why we need a smaller run. And this is because we want our rocket to be exposed to the sunlight as often or as long as we can. And by starting at break of dawn and flying along the poles, so strictly south or north, in this case north, we are kind of fixed towards the sun relative to the Earth's rotation or the Earth's way around the sun. So we are basically staying relative to Earth and sun, with the exception of course of flying over the poles and then coming back, etc. But in terms of direction towards the sun, and this means that very preferable to actually packing a ton more of batteries to take into flight if you would, for example, go into a polar orbit at noon, and then you would spend 50% of the time in the sun and 50% in the, which means that the satellite is going to pass over the poles, and it is going to kind of seem fixed upon space on the planet, our surface scanner, which is the whole point of this exercise. It has orbit circularizing here, and of course the satellite is much smaller than the previous ones. We did include a bigger tank, which we didn't fill up to the brim because we wanted to affix more solar panels to it. However, we also brought more solar panels than ever before on this type of satellite, which is not really necessary since it's going to be exposed to the sun all of the time. So I could have basically dialed back on the solar panels and the actual mass of the satellite by using a smaller tank, since we do not need as much sunlight as, for instance, our communication satellites that we took to the moon and which have too little energy, or energy storage at least. Yeah, so extending solar panels, of course, and this is the first time we're using the 1.6 the solar panels. I think we used the 3x2 solar panels on the moon satellites, is that correct? I think so. And orienting our craft towards the surface so that the scanner points towards the surface. And which is what we are going to do now, is activate the surface scanner and start taking our surface scans. And this part is coming with the ScanSat mod, and there is an option to actually have it produce science, but somehow this didn't work out. I don't know what the dependencies are for this mod, for this to actually produce science. However, this was not primarily a science mission, but more of a reputation and contract mission, and to actually have something that we can do in the meantime while we are setting up all the other missions. And as you can see, we're kind of being slightly offset regarding our angle that we were expecting, but it's still good. We are still getting enough sunlight, and once the scanner goes over the surface, we are getting these nice patterns. I call them the lawnmower patterns. And as the rocket or the satellite kind of stays in one place and the Earth rotates beneath it, of course we're going vertically, but talking about the horizontal axis, not that that's important in space, but I think you know what I mean. We kind of get this nice coverage of the Earth, and once we complete the contract with 75% coverage, we get all this sweet reputation and a little bit of science, and of course a little bit of reputation and money. So we didn't get any science, but that's okay anyway. So our next mission is going to be to rescue a Kerbal from an equatorial orbit named from. Because a ton of things with this mission go wrong, and we're going to learn something from our mistakes. At least that's what I hope. So, since we need to rescue a Kerbal, this rocket features an empty Mk1 pod sitting on top of a flight computer and a probe core, which is sitting on top of a typical second stage and an ascent stage with the same booster configuration as our moon rocket. And this of course means that we are going to bring more delta V than in the previous mission, which is because we have more mass that we need to carry into orbit. This capsule is actually weighing something, and we need to go into an equatorial orbit. And as I've mentioned in the last episode, the problem here is that the Kennedy Space Center is not sitting exactly on the equator. It's sitting way up north to the equator. It's still one of the most southern points of the US. So there you go, that's why it is there. But it's nowhere near the equator, so we do have to factor in the inclination change once we intersect the equator. And as we did in the previous mission, last mission we did kind of try to go southwards a bit earlier, and this time we are burning a bit more eastward to find out if actually which one of those two strategies is more efficient in terms of delta V requirements. And I haven't done the math yet. I'm going to do this after this episode, but my impression is that this method here is actually more efficient, and we might need to consider it as the new standard format. Once we've completed our orbit and we are in a stable orbit, we need to actually do this inclination change, and this takes up quite a lot of delta V, which because we were going to fly over one of the, and as it turns out actually was a wise idea, because we kind of capture, and this means we of course need more time to do the rendezvous. If this to rendezvous with, however, this is the next mistake, we did this on the night side. So of course this whole thing is going to take place. Very bad for filming an episode for it. So there you go, this is why the hermetically sealed autonomous space ship. And we kind of use this because the life support in the capsule was already drained, but I do not know specifically out if the thresholds for the Kerbal dying would have been that rigorous that I needed to EVA right away. Anyway, that's what we did. While the Kerbal was flying towards our rescue craft, I kind of cancelled out the relative speed with the rescue vehicle, and also this again might not have been necessary, but there was about mid-flight and getting close to us to catch up to the other capsule and then do the EVA. But anyway, it did work out in the end, and this Kerbal now has the honor of being the first to EVA in space. I don't think we have done this in the past, so this was an accidental, so it is labeled learning from our mistakes. So this is something and of course the energy from the decoupler degrades our orbit just enough to actually have us fall into the ocean here. As you can see, the red target reticule of real trajectory in front of the coast. The next error is that I didn't put the flight record. Our Kerbal is a level 0 science officer. It's not going to be able to steer this vessel or use SAS, which would be very nice to have in this situation, because we kind of do all the changes to where we are pointing by hand, which got really tiresome really fast. Luckily enough, once we got into the thicker parts of the atmosphere, the craft was kind of facing the right way itself. And they're on a real planet with real weather. And as you can see, there's this storm front, this kind of, maybe a hurricane coming up here. And if this was a real landing, we would of course be in trouble going down in a hurricane, because picking up such a capsule is reliant on having helicopters and boats that come to the point where you touch down. And of course, a rough sea of a hurricane would not be the right environment for a small capsule to come down with. However, this is Kerbal Space Program, and even though the clouds are really nice addition to the stock KSP via some mods, it doesn't affect the surface or the tides at all. It doesn't affect us getting rescued. Anyway, we are coming down to the south of this hurricane, so all's well that ends well, and this is kind of what we are seeing here already. This episode is almost over. Rescued Kerbals, and then we are going to tackle the next mission, which is of course to go to the moon. Thank you for watching, and see you guys next time. Bye!